And welcome back. We are now going to look at the last of our tween options, which is that of the motion tween. Now this is going to be a little different than some of the things that we've seen with the classic and with the shape tween, but let's go ahead and kind of dive in here. So again, using our standard HD, let's go ahead and create our canvas here. Now, when we looked at the classic tween and the shape tween, there were two distinct differences. All right, so for example, if I were to have a rectangle here, when I am doing a classic tween, if you recall, when I went ahead and inserted a keyframe with this, and I said, hey, I want to turn this into a classic tween, it asks us to convert into a symbol, and we said, okay, sure, no big deal. And all we would do then is say, hey, we're just going to take this guy, and we're just going to move him over, and our classic tween would be applied. Now, if we were to let's go ahead and remove that classic tween, and let's go ahead and say, hey, we want to do now a shape tween. We would, of course, have to, let's delete this guy out of here. And if we go ahead and just draw ourselves in a regular shape, and then we say, hey, we want to make this into a shape tween. Remember, we did not get that same prompt, and that's because the shape tween is using pretty much a bitmap image. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete out this layer here. Let's make a new layer and delete that old one just so that one's gone. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and clear these frames out so we don't have to worry about it. So it's nice and fresh canvas. And let's go ahead and look at how this changes when we start looking at a motion tween. So for motion tween, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and go use our star option again, just because it's nice to see something that's a little different. And I'm going to go ahead and choose just a different color today. Let's go and do something more of a, how about a pink? Or, you know, maybe one of these gradient ones sounds pretty good. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw that in here. So there's our gradient star. And what I want to do is set this up as a motion tween. Now, remember with the classic and the shape tween, we inserted a keyframe and automatically populated for us a bunch of frames, which is fine. But with the motion tween, we actually don't want that keyframe in there. So I'm going to do a 2-second animation again. So I'm just going to right click here and just insert frame. All right, and that's just going to fill this with frames here. You notice there's not a keyframe here. All right, and the reason for that is because if we do a keyframe, it's with a motion tween, it's effectively saying you're going to create a whole new set of animation. And we don't want that with the motion one. So once that's created, I'm going to go ahead and right click on here and choose to create a motion tween. And again, you're going to see this thing just like when we had a classic tween that says it needs to be converted to a symbol. And so we can just go ahead and click on OK. And we, of course, now have a symbol here that we can then manipulate. And what I want to do with this symbol is I want to, for example, move it from point A to point B. And so here, of course, is point A where I'm starting, and that's at 1 frame. And if I go to the 60th frame, maybe I want something simple. So I'm just going to grab my selection tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and move that star across to the other side of the screen. Now you will notice there is something different here versus when we had our classic tween. With our classic tween, we didn't see this kind of path appear. It just would move it naturally for us. Motions give us a little bit more control in some certain aspects. Now there are drawbacks to this versus a classic tween. But if you're working with a symbol and you're just wanting to use a path like this, this is where motion tweens can really shine. So I can, of course, do a nice straight path like this, or I can also do a more curved path. So if you hover your cursor over near one of these little anchor point here, dots, each one of these dots represents effectively a change in your frames here. So you, of course, should have a pretty equivalent here to how many ever frames per second you are with the number of frames that you actually have with your animation. Now, of course, I have a 30 frame per second animation. I have 60 frames. So that means I should have roughly about every 2 seconds, this thing is moving across the screen. But if I were to grab one of these points here, and if you look at my mouse cursor, you can see there's a curved line underneath it. I can go ahead and grab this line actually and begin to bend this. And it will allow me to put this on a curved path. And the nice thing is, if I say, you know, I want to have multiple curved lines in here, I can actually grab multiple points in here if I really want to add this. So right now we just have a single curved path. So if I go ahead and play this, you can see it will follow that singular path. Now to get multiple hops in this, or different directions or curves or stuff like that, the trick here is to add keyframes. Now we're not going to insert keyframes because that's not what we want to do, because inserting a keyframe will, again, effectively make it treat like a whole new animation. What I'm going to do instead is simply go to a spot where I want to add something in. So let's just say every 20 seconds I want this star to do something else. So for example, as it starts coming down, I'm going to instead have the star come up a little bit, and you can see how it redirects that path of that animation. And maybe at the 40-second mark, I want this to come really far down, and you can see we have the path automatically adjusting itself to try and make for these different animations. Now the cool thing is that we can do even more with these keyframes here. So once we of course have created a keyframe, we have those options. And additionally, one thing I want to point out to you is up here at the object itself. So the star that we've created, we can change the properties of that star. So for example, you can see right now, this is set to a movie clip. We have other options called button and graphic, and we will explore these a little bit more as we move through the course. But if I change this to a graphic option real quick here, you can see that we have some different options that open up to us of different things that we can do. Versus if I am at a movie clip, you can see again the options have changed yet again with some of those things that are available to us. For now, it's okay if we keep this on movie clip. Again, we will explore these later on in a little bit more detail as we kind of dive a little bit deeper into working with Animate. One other thing I want to point out is as we move along this path here, we do have some options of things that we can do further. So if I hold down the Alt key, I can of course pull this path in different directions. If I wanted, for example, to customize this or make it into kind of its own piece without having to necessarily come in and set additional keyframes. So it's a kind of a nice thing for me to come in here real quickly to be able to just adjust this path on the fly. One other thing that we can do is anytime we have one of these keyframes here, is if I go to the frame tab here, and I could do that by simply either clicking on here, or if I'm clicked on the star itself and I just switch over to frame, there are two options that are probably going to be the ones that we look at the most. The first of which is the ease option. Ease option, of course, allows you to manipulate how quick or how slow you want something to come into it. So negative values are going to be more of an ease in, whereas a positive values would be more of an ease out. So just to demonstrate this, I'm going to reset this back to 0 real quick. And let's just go ahead and play this animation as it is so you can see how it just follows that path. But if I wanted to, for example, go through this set of animations really quickly, let's just go ahead. If we change this to an ease out, so let's just take that up to 10. And we're going to go ahead and run this from the first frame. You can see how it might look a little different. If we want to see that more pronounced, we of course can revisit that and say, you know, I want that to be even bigger. So let's just make that like 50. And if we go back to frame 1, you can start seeing there's some subtle differences going on there. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that whatever you do to one of these keyframes on this motion path, it will do to both. So this is one drawback of a motion tween, is that it kind of puts these smaller keyframes in here however it wants. Now, the last thing I want to show is rotation here. And this allows you to spin something. So I'm just going to, for example, choose clockwise. And you can choose to rotate this in any kind of value you want. So I'm just going to say like 30 degrees. And if I follow this along the path now, you can see that the star effectively has a tumble. So when I play this animation, you can see that star take its tumble as it walks through that animation. And if I were to loop this and run the loop through the entire thing, just so you can kind of see that on a loop there, you can see just how that animation now has all come together. Now, there are a couple more things that we can look at with a little more fine tooth with the Motion Tween, but I think this is a good stopping point here today just to kind of get our feet wet with things that we can do with Motion Tweens.